Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allah.
New York City, the sights, smells, touch, and taste of America's most populous metropolis seem to come at you from every angle, but maybe none more jarring than sound. And while sound is a scientific absolute, noise is an interpretation, something loud or unpleasant that causes a disturbance. Is that ice cream truck music to your ears or annoying as hell? Do church bells ruin your Sunday sleeping in or touch your soul? In East New York, one mosque's adhan, or call to prayer, has become a call to arms for neighbors who filed noise complaints with 311. 156 of them over the course of 12 months about the 3-minute, 5 times daily reminder that begins sometime before 5 a.m. and happen every few hours till just before 9 p.m. In the end, city officials intervened and the mosque turned down the volume. A compromise not dissimilar to a bar cranking down the jukebox. But this was no Mr. Softy circling the block. We're talking a fundamental tenet of the world's second most adhered to religion. You shall enjoin your family to observe the contact prayers and steadfastly persevere in doing so. Steadfast perseverance is something Muslims in America are getting pretty good at. How could they not? Surveilled by both neighbors and police, hijab-wearing women attacked in the streets, 4 separate mosques burned down in a 7-week span. Nationally, hate crimes against Muslims surged 44%. Right here in New York State, reported cases of bias assault and harassment against Muslims rose by more than 560%. More than half of those incidents happened in the 7 weeks following the presidential election. Think of those statistics the next time you see some self-proclaimed patriots rallying against a mosque opening or complaining that an existing one is just too loud. America's history of religious tolerance is only outlapped by its tendency to ask natives and newcomers alike to just be a little less what you are. Ew, you eat that? Take that thing off your head. Speak English. Sadly, those are the hard yards of weaving yourself into the tapestry of this American experiment. Irish not welcome. Japanese internment, Jim Crow, native genocide. The list is hardly exhaustive. Depending on which talk radio station you favor, we're either a nation of immigrants or a nation of laws which aren't followed. But when the law of the land shifts to ban immigrants and asylum seekers alike simply because they pray at a different altar, we have to ask ourselves some very tough questions. So let's go in. In this episode of Going In, I go to work at America's largest Muslim civil rights organization and find out what they do and why they need to work so hard.
We also need to prep for the upcoming murder trial.
Then we meet Farzana, a Muslim American girl of 7 when 9/11 happened. She's haunted by the bullying and the Islamophobia that followed.
I just remember talking to one girl and she's like, "Oh, well, you did it. You blew down the Twin Towers. You're Muslim, you did it."
Finally, there's Muhammad, working the graveyard shift to support his new wife and baby on the way in Yemen, and having no real idea how long he has to wait to bring them to America.
It'll take about a year to 2 to 3 years.
When we go in on being Muslim in Brooklyn.
Allahu Akbar.
This was phenomenal. Congratulations.
Awesome. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was pretty moving, actually. I was shocked when I could hear people going in unison, like it strikes a chord somewhere, you feel it.
For sure, for sure. And it's actually beautiful because here in New York, we're a very multicultural state, and you get a view of that right here in this prayer. You have a mixture of African Americans, Desi, Arab, all standing right next to each other, so it's very beautiful.
Even pulled out further than that, when I got here, I saw like older Asian people doing Tai Chi, and everyone streaming in. I'm like, this feels like the city and the world that we want.
About 5 or 6 years ago, we didn't even have a prayer over here. All of the mosques used to basically pray indoors, and then we had the idea, along with other Muslim organizations, to all come out and just bring all of the mosques, all of the various organizations to one spot.
Well, you said 5 or 6 years ago, and I can't help but to think of what this country was like 5 or 6 years ago. It wasn't perfect, but you didn't have a guy in the White House trying to legitimize hate and make it law. Do you feel like in your community you're in a defensive pattern or an offensive one right now?
There's definitely challenges for sure. I think being too defensive can also make you paranoid and closed off. So as a Muslim community, we've encouraged everybody, go about your lives, keep doing what Islam teaches you, give back to the community, be productive members of society, and everything, you know, whatever's out of your hands is out of your hands. We just have to do whatever is in our part to be productive and beneficial members of society.
To be Muslim in New York City seems like shape-shifting from a defensive stance against all things demeaning and discriminatory to an offensive posture, pushing to maintain hard-earned gains on every front. For a nonprofit institution, that duality has to scale every day. I spent an afternoon with the core staff of the New York branch of the nation's foremost Muslim civil rights group to see firsthand how they do it. In 1967, 4 months before a white supremacist bullet ended his life, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a lecture where he voiced what has become one of his most enduring ideas. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. All right, put me to work. With those words as inspiration, I'm going in at the nation's premier Muslim civil rights group,
the Council on American-Islamic Relations, CARE.
CARE has 35 affiliates across the country, and they've been protecting the civil liberties of American Muslims, building coalitions, and promoting justice for more than 25 years. And today, I'm their intern.
So we're also trying to identify public listservs, the public interest listserv.
There's no coffee fetching and lunch orders here. It's a small office, dealing with big issues.
What kind of people will volunteer? Who is there, like a typical?
All types of people.
Yeah.
So many different backgrounds. It's been pretty amazing actually since Trump. We've been having, there was a week when we had like a month where we would have like 3 volunteers come in every single day and help us out. It's been really amazing.
On this afternoon, CARE New York's legal director was getting prepped for a series of lobbying meetings at City Hall.
Meeting went very well with co-counsel yesterday for the potential NYPD class action about Muslim detainees, and really heartbreaking. We also need to prep for the upcoming murder trial.
How's the family feeling?
They're just still very frustrated, yeah. And the main thing is just trying to convey to them that it's going to take time and that we may never have a clear explanation for why this happened.
Murder trials, mobilizing members, delivering leaflets to airports, plus planning a gala, proofreading translations, and recruiting interns. The tedious tasks and major lifts that CARE deals with day to day.
All right, thanks guys, let's get back to work.
Can I ask one question before you guys ask? So this was as boring as any staff meeting I've ever sat in at any nonprofit. What do you think the reality of this meeting and the work you do is versus the perception of what the work you do is? Like from someone who lives 2 blocks away from here, who just walks by the building and is like, oh yeah, that's where the Muslim people are.
You know, when people think that's where the Muslim people are, I don't know what they're thinking, to be honest with you. I mean, that's part of it, so that's already a wild card.
Right.
If they understand what we do, and we are a civil rights advocacy organization, then they may think huge things like the Washington Square Park rally that we had, right, where thousands came up and there were helicopters flying above us. So they may think in those terms. But then also there's the internal role of the organization to build our capacity for those that we serve, and that's really important. And that's where a lot of the boring stuff comes in, but it needs to be done.
Do you feel like you're in like a reactionary spin all the time, or are you feeling like more offensive or defensive at this very moment?
I always say that we're both proactive and reactive, and we need to be, right? Proactive means trying to engage with the community before anything happens. So some of the stuff that we spoke about at the meeting had to do with Know Your Rights workshops, getting that information out, letting people understand what their rights are. It's really important. And then reactive is having to go into the airports because something just happened at the wave of a pen and we need to be reactive. Reactive is also sometimes when the client calls up and no one else in the entire world knows about what this person is going through, right? And we have to react to that person's situation. We have to go, whether it's something like visit somebody at the hospital because they've been a victim of a hate crime or work discrimination, which the client is saying, look, I can't pay for my child's diapers, and this is all because I'm Muslim.
10 years ago, you guys released American Muslims, a journalist's guide to understanding Islam and Muslims. So 10 years on, what do people in my field need to know that they didn't learn back then?
So I think one of the most problematic things we deal with constantly is the double standard on terrorism. Time and again, we see the media framing of an attack completely change. If it's someone with a, who practices Islam, someone from a Muslim majority country, someone with a name associated with Islam, we associate violence with this religion not because that's the fact, but because that's the default assumption. And when you see white supremacist terrorists killing people in Charlottesville, killing people in black churches, that is terrorism, and yet our laws and our media framing don't see the equivalence. The media framing needs to change, and the media needs to understand that anytime someone commits an act of violence because of an ideology, regardless of their skin color, regardless of their faith, that is terrorism.
You can't do this work without being driven and without being passionate and understanding that you're really impacting people's lives on a day-to-day basis.
So squash something that you've heard about Muslims or a perception that somebody might have that today will just be the last day they ever thought of that or it goes around.
I guess just the idea that Muslims are not allowed to live, in peace and serenity with non-Muslims. You don't need to look any further than the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. There was Christians at his time, there was Jews at his time, there were monasteries, there were churches. You have different perverted interpretations of the Quran today, but who can give a better, the Quran is the holy book of the Muslims, who can give a better interpretation and implementation than the Prophet himself? And the Prophet himself allowed for non-Muslims within the Muslim society. They were living right next to each other, neighbors.
7-year-old Farzana Aliyah Muhammad walked into school the day after 9/11 to accusatory looks and angry words from her classmates. 9/11 and Islamophobia shifted her identity. Now the current administration's policies and rhetoric around Muslims continue to impact her mental health and the mental health of her community.
I just remember talking to one girl and she's like, oh, well, you did it. You blew down the Twin Towers. You're Muslim. You did it. I didn't realize that I had PTSD in high school. I didn't understand what it was to be a Muslim without struggle, without someone who was the antithesis to me and who was trying to be combative with me.
On September 11th, 2001,
everywhere, it's very, very difficult to see.
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center.
There are no words.
The day after 9/11 was very hazy. I watched the towers fall the evening before, but I couldn't grasp it. I thought, oh, okay, well, we'll rebuild them. Everything will be fine. When I went to school, the teachers seemed very panicked. I was a very sociable young girl. The other students that I thought were my friends felt very uncomfortable around me. They didn't want to speak with me during recess or in between classes. Students would beat me up at lunch. You're Saddam Hussein. Grab me, throw things at me. You're Osama bin Laden. Kick me, spit on me. Do you have a bomb in your back? Or I was hit so badly by these boys, I wasn't able to breathe. The nurse just shrugged it off, saying, "Oh, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it." It was that moment where my childhood shifted for the next 10 years. Pre 9/11, I was very proud of my Muslim identity. I was proud of the fact that I had a very Muslim name, a name unlike all the other students. I wasn't a Stephanie, I wasn't a Maria, I was a Farzana. Post 9/11, all of that stopped. We stopped listening to the music, we stopped watching the television shows, my father stopped practicing. All I remember is that Islam became a topic that became increasingly hush-hush within my household. They told me to embrace this staunch Americanism, really sanitize my Muslim identity. By virtue of assimilation, I would be successful, and if I was successful, that meant I was safe. I developed a very strong relationship with my faith. I was constantly thinking about God, partially because it made me feel less lonely. It made me feel like I had someone there. I practiced a faith that sustained me and quite literally kept me alive as I graduated that Catholic school and entered high school. There were other students, other Muslim students, who were struggling with depression, with mental illness, and many of my friends were self-harming. That's how they coped. I didn't do that, but I was strongly considering suicide for a point in time, and that's when my parents really started to get involved in my adolescence, but they never acknowledged mental illness in any capacity. They just thought I needed discipline. They didn't see it as me having mental illness or having PTSD or experiencing trauma. I am a part-time research technician at Brooklyn College in the Department of Chemistry. This has catapulted my research interests in mental health and neuropsychiatric disorders like depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and general anxiety disorder. Being able to molecularly categorize these illnesses as they affect many individuals in our community amidst the trying political times, and folks within the Muslim community, giving scientific validation to the fact that these pathologies do exist. This autumn was very difficult for me. I was getting to a point in my activism where I was attending marches. I was writing about the abuses that Muslim folks experience in New York City, in this country. And in the wake of the growing Islamophobic rhetoric circa the election, it was becoming overwhelming. It was triggering to me so many fears of my own childhood growing up in a political climate where you are hated and you have to develop a personality based on everyone and everything hating you. It's like lying beneath a building. You learn to live pinned beneath that building, beneath any institution that refuses to acknowledge and validate who you are.
If you had a one-on-one right now to talk to the president or anybody who's in a position to make decisions, what would you say?
That fear only begets fear, and we need to really look at this in an educated and well-balanced view. Of course, Muslims and non-Muslims all care about the safety of the society. However, how do we achieve that? Is fear-mongering, is being, very, radical and headstrong in our way the way to achieve it, or should we look at it in a more educated and look at the people that have studied this much longer and not think with a lens of fear, but more think with a lens of solving solving the issues in the wisest of ways.
In February, Yemeni bodega owners across New York City closed up shop from noon till 8 p.m. to protest President Trump's immigration policies. Mohammed wasn't there. The 22-year-old bodega worker was in Yemen getting married. Back behind the counter on his 2 a.m. shift at the bodega, Mohammed offers up his thoughts.
Allahu Akbar.
Okay, I'm from Yemen. I spent most of my life there. It's beautiful, actually. Traditions, culture, it's all different than here. Yeah, I came here when I was 16. Went to the GED, took the GED, started working over here 10 hours. Night shift, finish here at 8 o'clock, go to school until 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, go home, sleep, working a night shift, finish here at 8 o'clock, go to school until 2 or 3 o'clock, go home, sleep, working a night shift, finish here at 8 o'clock, go to school until 3 o'clock, go home, sleep, working a night shift, yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were doing the same.
8 a.m. $5.25. Sure. I don't want to do that. This job, this kind of job, is just being stuck. We're over here for almost 12 hours, sometimes 13, 14 hours. Just do the same thing all over for almost 3 years. So we feel like a prisoner. My dad was, when I talked to him when we came here, I was like, it's hard, I can't do it. He told me that you're a grown man and young, push yourself. It was like, he had a really difficult life when he came here. So we started working. The next day, we arrived to the United States. I just wanted to marry, that's all. So, my dad told me to work harder so I could go back and marry. I can't go back there at this time because I have to do something for me and for them. Because I'm applying for the citizenship. Just applied last week, and at the same time I want to apply for them to get them here. So when I talked to the lawyer and I asked her how long it's gonna take, they told me that it's gonna take about a year to 2 to 3 years.
Protection of the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States. That's big stuff.
No bed, no registry, fuck white supremacy, no bed, no registry, fuck white supremacy, no bed, no registry, fuck white supremacy.
Well, I'm not worried about it. It's just everybody has suffered from different things and it always goes away. So I'm not worried about that. Trump making it a big deal, so he want to show off. I like this neighborhood. This neighborhood, they were always nice to me. It's to all other people, all other Muslims. It's actually in the holidays. You see in the holidays, some of the neighbors, they came out, you know, taking picture with us, doing all this. haven't seen any offense from them. Nobody talked to me like from racism things and all that. Once it was Fulton. We were talking over there, and all of a sudden, just old lady comes up and with the stick, she started shouting, and as soon as she heard us talking, because we were talking in Arabic, as soon as she heard us talking, and she started yelling and started talking about 9/11 or that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, ISIS. You're the one who killed all the people. You Muslims are start cursing at us, talking to us, and then you just walk away. Her daughter comes up to us and apologizes.
Thanks for going in with us on Being Muslim in New York City. We'll keep sharing stories as long as you keep sharing with us. And if you enjoyed the show, why don't you share it with a friend? You can meet us right here next week or check out Going In or any of the other fine programs we produce at youtube.com/BRIC TV. I'm Brian Vines. Bye now.